Today I have the 4060 Ti killer.
Hasta la vista, baby.
That's right, it's the AMD 7700 XT. Now what does the XT stand for? Stands for extra testicles. Wait, according to Reddit, XT actually stands for extreme, but saying that your GPU has extra testicles sounds a little more impressive. But anyways,
on paper, it's pretty impressive. AMD advertises it as a 1440p card.
Now on AMD's website, they do have a list of games and what kind of FPS to expect at 1440p max settings. However,
they conveniently leave out games that are very GPU demanding,
like Cyberpunk, which even pushes the limits of my 4080 at 1440p. And another game they conveniently left out is Starfield. Wonder why they did that. I'm sure a lot of gamers would like to know what kind of FPS to expect from the 7700 XT when playing Starfield.
Sorry, I have to put my cat somewhere. So, we're going to be doing some benchmarks, some gaming. We're going to see how the 7700 XT performs at 1440p max settings on modern AAA games. So if you're in the market for a 1440p GPU, this video is going to be pretty sicko mode. So before we get started, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below. And every video I post will be more sicko mode than the last. All right, let's get to it. First things first, let's talk about the GPU I have here.
Obviously this is the RX 7700 XT, and as far as the looks go of this gigabyte version, I mean it looks nice, but it's not anything extraordinary. It's not gonna drop any panties, it's just, you know, it's a nice looking GPU. Now I think the biggest selling point of the 7700 XT is the fact that it has 12 gigs of VRAM at the $450 price point. Although the 4060 Ti is a little cheaper, its biggest downfall is that it only has 8 gigs of VRAM, and some AAA games actually benefit from more VRAM, like Hogwarts Legacy. And the 7700 XT has 12 gigs of VRAM, the same amount as the 4070. It just doesn't have GDDR6X RAM, but that's okay. The 7700 XT is cheaper. The 7700 XT was designed to be a better value than the 4060 Ti, which in my opinion was a big disappointment. Big dumb by nvidia. I say that because it wasn't much of a jump in performance compared to my 3060 Ti. Now the 7700 XT is replacing the outgoing 6700 XT, but in this case the 7700 XT outperforms the 6700 XT by quite a good margin, according to techspot.com.
So on paper, pretty impressive. Now let's talk about the build that I use to benchmark this GPU.
Obviously I'm using the Gigabyte 7700 XT. I decided to pair it with the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D, so it's AMD CPU and GPU, you know, to keep it in the family. Cooling the processor, I have the DeepCool AK620 Zero Dark Cooler, which is phenomenal by the way. Now the motherboard. I debated whether I should use this older B450 board or a newer B550 board. The biggest differences would be the PCIe 4.0 versus the PCIe 3.0 on the B450 board. So I went ahead and just tested it on both, and during my testing there was absolutely zero difference in performance when I swapped out the motherboards. So I just stuck with my trusty B450. 32 gigs of 3600 MHz Corsair RAM, a 1TB WD black NVMe drive, 850 watt power supply, and it's all inside of the Corsair 4000D airflow case.
So now let's move on from the boring stuff and let's talk about gaming. So the first game I ran was Starfield.
So I'm playing at 1440p ultra settings, and I will say the game does look pretty good. Now my FPS is hovering around 60, sometimes dipping below it. If you look at the amount of video RAM I'm using, I'm actually using boob amount of RAM. Is that right? Boob? But anyways, this game is making this card work pretty hard. The 12 gigs of VRAM is definitely helping out, and this card is actually keeping up with my RTX 3080, which I use as my benchmark card. So if it's keeping up with my 3080, that means the card is pretty good. Now when it comes to playing Starfield, I kind of see why they don't put it on their website. For smooth gameplay, I would like to see my FPS above 60 FPS. So at 1440p, you may need to turn down your settings to high settings to achieve 60 FPS. And hold on, this crazy girl keeps chasing me. I think she likes my hair. What you gonna do now, huh? You're not gonna jump off that? Stupid bitch, you gotta be effing kidding me. Regardless, this card does a pretty good job at playing Starfield.
You lose.
The next game I ran was Shadow of the Tomb Raider.
1440p ultra settings, and we started with a pretty healthy number when it comes to FPS, around 120 FPS, and the VRAM once again is above 10 gigs. Now when you compare it to my benchmark card, the RTX 3080, my FPS is way higher, but take a look at the VRAM usage, about 7.5 on the 3080 and over 10 gigs on the 7700 XT. So even though I'm getting way better FPS on the 3080, look at the level of detail the 7700 XT is able to display. All the rocks and plants look way sharper, and when there's a lot of detail in the scene, it seems like the 7700 XT with its 12 gigs of VRAM as opposed to the 10 gigs on the 3080 is able to handle that better. And even though my FPS is lower than the 3080, it's nothing to complain about. It's still gonna look buttery smooth. I was kind of blown away by the level of detail that the 7700 XT was able to display compared to the 3080. The 7700 XT ended up finishing the benchmark at 124 frames per second. That's pretty good.
Then I ran the Cyberpunk benchmark.
1440p with ray tracing on ultra settings. Now I have to say right off the bat my FPS was not good. It was looking a bit choppy and my FPS was only in the 40s. Oh, now it's in the 50s. You're definitely gonna need to turn down the settings if you want ray tracing on, probably medium settings. However, with ray tracing off, my FPS shot way up, but my reflections look pretty crappy when you compare it to ray tracing. Hold on, let's play that back again. Just look at the difference. When they're side by side, it's like night and day. So Cyberpunk is definitely playable, just not at the highest ray trace settings. So either medium ray trace settings or ultra with ray tracing off, because that one finished at 89 frames per second, while ray tracing ultra finished at 47. Pretty good, but I see why AMD didn't advertise this game on their website.
Then I ran the Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark.
Once again, 1440p ultra settings, and right off the bat the 7700 XT is giving me a healthy FPS over 60 frames per second, so really there's no complaints. And when you compare it to the benchmark card, the 3080 is giving us about 30 frames per second better. This horse looks like it just gave up on living. The 7700 XT finished at 66 frames per second, almost 67, and that's very reasonable. It gave you over 60 FPS at ultra settings. It got the job done.
And the final game I ran was GTA 5.
So whoa, my bad. 1440p ultra, and I'm getting pretty solid FPS. It never dipped below 100, so if you have a 144Hz monitor, these settings with this card are perfect. Now compared to the benchmark card, the 3080 is outperforming it, giving you better FPS. Looks like extra VRAM is not going to help out in this game because it's only using about 5 gigs. But the FPS that the 7700 XT is giving you is nothing to complain about. And if you are complaining about it, what I suggest you do is go buy a commercial grade lawnmower from Honda, go and mow 28 people's yards in one day in the Texas heat. Growing up, that's what I had to do to help the family business, and it made me very rosado. Rosado means chafed in Spanish. But anyways, this will make you appreciate the 130 frames per second that the 7700 XT is giving you.
After running all these tests, after running all these games, is the 7700 XT a true 1440p GPU?
Yes, it definitely is. Every single game I played, including Starfield and Cyberpunk, the 7700 XT was able to get at least 60 frames per second at 1440p. Maybe not at the highest settings, as seen in Cyberpunk with ray tracing on, but for $450, 12 gigs of VRAM, and better performance than a 4060 Ti, this card is actually not that bad. Now I know I compared it to my benchmark card, the 3080. Just remember, the 3080 was $700 when it was released, and to this day it's still not cheap. So just because it outperformed it in some tests, the 7700 XT actually held its own, especially in Starfield, where the differences were minimal. Now if you want better FPS with ray tracing on, you may want to consider the 7800 XT. It's actually not that much more, has 16 gigs of VRAM, all while being $100 less than the 4070. Once I get my hands on one of these bad boys, I'm for sure gonna test it and compare. Another thing is the 7700 XT is replacing the outgoing 6700 XT. There's a significant improvement in performance when you compare these cards, unlike the 3060 Ti and the 4060 Ti, where the performance jump was marginal. So overall, I think AMD gave us a really good 1440p card that's worth considering. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Would you go with the AMD RX 7700 XT?
And if you like this content, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Each video I make, I strive to make more Sicko Mode than the last. And like always, have a Sicko Mode day.